All right. Next up, what to expect of your daily life. And this is pretty much all negative. You'll hate your sales manager. I have one friend of mine who was my sales manager at the time. He's one of the best guys in the world. He's an exception to the rule. He was the kind of guy who would just tell you straight up what's going on. He wouldn't try to spin what head office was saying. But some of the worst people I've met in my life are sales managers. Some of the worst human garbage. I'm not Jordan Belfort bad, but only because they didn't have his intelligence or organizational abilities. But most sales managers are terrible people. And I don't care what anyone says. That's the truth. Number 2, you'll hate your clients. Now, your clients aren't going to treat you as badly as your sales manager, but they're not going to treat you much better because you're expendable to them. So they can order you around like you're a fucking Applebee's waitress. And if they're having a bad day, they know they can take it out on you because they're paying you money. And some of the worst clients are the ones who, let's say the VP of marketing. So it's not even their money, but they don't have the power they want in the organization. So they look at ways to take their power out on someone like you who has to listen, even though it's her boss spending the money with you or whatever. And the power dynamics are skewed. So you really see, like, if you guys have worked in retail before, when I first worked in retail in high school, I was shocked at how rude people would treat me because you're used to being in social situations where there's some kind of consequence for being rude, but there is no consequence for being rude to a salesperson. And the behavior you get from people can be very, very bad. And, out of 5 clients, you might hate 4 of them because they're just not very nice to you. And they treat you like, a low-level functionary, basically. So that's just the reality. If you have your own business, beautiful. You can just fire your problem clients, but when you have targets to meet, it's very hard to fire a client and explain to your boss, hey, I missed my target because my client was treating me horrendously and I had to fire them. He's not going to like that. You are never going to be able to fire a client when you work for someone else. Put it that way. Number 3, you're going to live and die by your targets. Sales pays well because it's a shitty job and no one else wants to do it. No one else wants to make 100, 200 cold calls a day. But that is a breeze. Dealing with your clients, making your cold calls. Once you make your first couple cold calls, you don't even worry about that anymore. Once you get your clients are angry, yes, that's a problem, but by far the most stressful thing is your targets, okay? And if you've got a high-pressure job in a high-pressure company, you're going to think about your targets in the shower, you're going to think about your targets at family dinners, you're going to think about your targets when you're fucking a girl. Like, it's ridiculous how much that happens. And if you're new to sales and it's just your first couple months in, you're not really going to feel that yet. You're going to be like, I don't know what Will's talking about. Give it 2, 3, 4, 5 years in, and it just becomes such a constant in your life. Your life revolves around, it's almost like time stops still, and your life just revolves around that monthly target, and it becomes a priority over your health, over everything else, because that is the thing that if you don't hit that target, within a couple months you could be out of work. And so to keep your resources and to keep your lifestyle, that target becomes the most important thing in your world. And that is not a fun way to live. Number 4, lying is built into your targets. So those targets that we're talking about, every salesman lies to hit those targets in some way or the other. And anyone who says otherwise is selling you and lying to you. The reason lying is built into your targets is because you don't set your own targets. Someone else sets them for you and they raise them aggressively. I worked at a company where it was like your targets will go up 15% a year no matter what. So to be able to hit that, you have to start. There's only so many clients you can bring on and there's only so much money you can bring on. And to hit that 100% and to consistently hit those targets every month, you have to be willing to get targets who aren't 100% of a fit for the product, or get a little bit of extra money out of that guy by selling him a little bit extra, something that wasn't 100%, in his best interest. And because otherwise, a lot of the time, you're only going to hit 80 or 90% of your target. But it does depend on your company. If you're lucky and you've got a really ethical company, you might be able to hit most of your target without lying. But even then, you're still going to lie on little things. It'll be like you missed the guy's call, so you told him you were in a meeting, but really you were getting lunch or in a washroom. Like, I don't care what anyone says. Everyone's going to white lie to their clients about stuff like that. And when you're talking about stuff with your manager and stuff, they're always talking about the angle. Okay, pitch them on this angle, pitch them on that angle. And that's all like, if it's not outright lying, it's like manipulation. And that's just part of the job. If you have your own business, you can be 100% honest. Okay, if you guys look at my sales page for how to get laid on Tinder, I tell overweight guys not to buy the book. And I tell guys who are Asian and Indian to be very careful about buying the book unless you are well above average looking, because it's just not going to work for you. That's the reality. I could never do that if I was working for someone else. Never, ever. I could never be honest with guys like that, because they would be like, "What? You're leaving all this money on the table. You should tell anyone that can work for anyone," and blah, 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 blah. So a good rule of thumb is the more unethical the company, the worse the people are who run the company, the greater the lies that are going to be expected. Perfect example is the Wolf of Wall Street. That's at its worst. So those guys are working on 100% lies and deception. Everything they're selling to their clients is a bullshit scam stock. It's a pump and dump operation. Everything's a lie. So that's one thing to remember. And every day in sales is going to be an ethical challenge, and I advise you to try and keep as much of your integrity as you can, and try and lie as little as possible. Lying and pushiness did not come naturally to me. I'm Canadian, and I was raised by someone. I remember as a kid, my mom would stop the car every 10 meters to give money to a homeless person, and the biggest bleeding heart liberal in the world. So doing all this stuff did not come naturally to me, and I never really took to it. A lot of guys, young impressionable guys, come in and they can't believe this is what it's like, but eventually they're just like, whatever, and they rip their clients' faces off, and they're like, well, I do my job and I do what I have to do, and that's that. And they're just brainwashed into thinking that this is an okay way to act. But at the end of the day, that's why most long-term salesmen have a drinking problem, or problem with drugs, or problem with overeating, and they're not happy because at the end of the day, it doesn't feel good it feels good to make your customers happy and to give them more value than they expected, not to always be trying to hustle them into something and worried if he's going to find out and all this stuff. Like with my books that I sell online now, I know that guy is going to get the best product on that. When I say my book on sex is the best book available, I believe that 100%. With Tinder, for getting laid online, my Tinder book is the best available. I 100% believe that. And if the guy doesn't like it, I give him a refund. And I give him a refund 100% of the time within 24 hours at the maximum. So my conscience is completely clean. And it feels terrific. And when guys thank me and stuff like that, it feels terrific. But when you're lying to your clients and you're doing that, you miss all those other benefits. So unfortunately, though, a lot of that's going to be out of your control, because a lot of the time the lying literally is your pitch to clients is going to involve a lie. When I was in ad sales, I was required by my manager to inflate our ad numbers our circulation numbers by as much as 30 to 40%. And all the other companies were doing it too. It wasn't just us. If he heard me on the phone and I was pitching the real numbers, that would be a problem. I would get a lecture for that. Okay? So every single sales call, every time I talked about our circulation numbers, I was lying. That's just an example. So try and do as little of that as possible. You know, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to hitting your targets, but you know, if you're feeling something's ethically wrong, it probably is, and don't stop listening to that voice, because you know that there's a voice that is watching all your actions, and that voice is a lot of your happiness is going to come from that. And happiness is the most important thing in your life, and once you stop listening to your conscience, you become like a Jordan Belfort, where you got to take drugs just to get through the day because you're doing so much like horrible shit. And one last thing about lying is you're never going to be an elite level salesman with a strong conscience, because how could you compete with a Jordan Belfort? You know, if you're a guy who's got an ethical line, a guy who will say literally anything to close a deal and doesn't care is going to be the best salesman in your office. The best salesman is usually going to be the worst person. Into some, not always, but they are going to be the most ruthless, the most willing to rip their clients' faces off. And you can't compete with that if you're going to be, you know, if you're trying to be more ethical. Like, that's just the reality. You can't compete with the Jordan Belforts of the world. But you can still be a good salesman. You can still hit your targets. You know, you just might have to work a bit harder than everyone else. You might have to do an extra 30 cold calls than the guy next to you. Number 5, sales is uncomfortable. Sales is the hardest white-collar job. That's why women always make less than men, because they can't sell. They refuse to take hardcore sales jobs. You know, we had maybe 1 out of 100 applications came from women, and women are just way worse at selling. They're way worse at taking the beating. They're way worse at applying their will in a hardcore way. Not a knock against them. That's just the reality. And the only women that can really do it are these tough, like, working class girls that have come up through the call centers and you know, had a really like rough upbringing. They can make it happen, but pretty much every middle class girl goes into like marketing instead of sales, because it is a hard thing to do. It is hard. It is not natural to call up 100 people a day and be pushy and try and impose your will and try and you know, hammer them into buying what you want. It is uncomfortable, and you're breaking rapport. You are harassing people. You're calling them multiple times a day to get a hold of them. That aversion to that is a natural human reaction. Our natural human reaction is to want to be able to get along with people and to want and to be nice and pleasant. But you know, to get things done, to really get paid, you've got to be willing to take that uncomfortable feeling. And that's why you get paid well for sales, because no one wants to do it. It takes a certain kind of man to be able to be in sales for a long time, and that is a tough guy. I've got all the respect in the world for career salesmen. A guy who's been on the road for 25 years, or a guy who's been on the phone selling for 30 years. That is a tough motherfucker. I don't care what anyone tells you. That is one of the toughest guys out there. Number 6, failure is built into your targets. Okay? You are destined to fail at some point. This might sound counterintuitive, but failure is built into your targets, just like lying. Because let's say they're raising your targets 15-20% a year, there's going to come a time where you can't hit those anymore. Most likely. Long enough timeline, everything fails. And sales fails a lot faster than that, because the way it works is you're supposed to get fired or move up. You usually get fired. Usually guys don't last at a job for more than 3 years. They burn out because they're struggling to hit their targets, or they get fired. And the targets don't stop. They keep going up. And that's by design, because they want to get the most out of a guy. And they know a guy stays there 3 years, so they want to get the absolute most out of him. And when he's burnt out, fire him, get a new guy in, push him hard. Same cycle repeats itself. And if you're in something like financial sales, when they fire you, that's a good thing for the company, because now they don't have a salary to pay, and they get to transfer your book of business to another guy. and instead of having to pay 2 salaries, they only have to pay 1. And if guys are hitting targets for a long period of time, it's usually because of that. It's usually not because they are getting so many more new clients. It's because they're outlasting everyone. And when someone gets fired, they inherit their book of business. The way to be able to do that is to hit your numbers consistently and have management like you. But I'm going to get more into that more in the next section. But for now, just know that companies love to fire salesmen because they inherit clients and they release a salary. And this is especially true in industries like when I was in ad sales, where my company booked my commissions in advance. So like you'd lock down a company for a year of advertising, but they don't pay you on that until the company pays you. So the second you close that deal, you don't get paid until 8 months later. When I left ad sales, I left with $100,000 in revenue on the table that I didn't get paid for, and I knew that I wasn't going to get paid for. So, I mean, that company's made an absolute fortune by not having to pay out commissions to salesmen that leave. And that's just something to remember. Like, you are not going to be there forever. They know that, and they're trying to get the most out of you, and they're trying to push you as hard as possible while you're there to get the most out of you. Number 7, you'll burn out. This kind of goes with failure being built into your targets. A long enough timeline, you're going to burn out. Most guys either get quit or get fired within 3 years. And the standard arc goes like this. Guy gets hired, he buys into the company dream. Over time, though, he slowly starts to see the cracks in the reality, starts to hate his company, starts to hate his manager, starts to hate his coworkers. By year 3, he's burnt out, he's negative, and he's on his way to getting canned. So he either gets fired or he quits and finds another company. Or a lot of the time what salesmen do is they quit and they just take a month off to like chill the fuck out. Then they repeat the same process with another company, and they say, hey, man, you get an email from your buddy. Hey, man, I'm over here now. It's way better. They treat our salesmen way better. I'm much happier, right? And then 3 years later, same thing again. That's why you see most guys don't stay at a job for more than 3 years, because they just start to hate the company. They don't realize that it's the lifestyle. It's just being a salesman that they don't like. And one of the sad things to see is some older guys are just permanently burnt out. Like, they've just been burnt out for the last decade. They're always stressed. They're always angry. They're overweight. They have a drinking problem or drug problem, but they've got a mortgage and they've got kids and they've got car payments, and they don't have any other way to earn an income. They never started a business. They have no way out, so they're just burnt out and just somehow getting themselves to work every day out of just sheer, necessity. And a lot of that, like when you really see that face to face, if you've read that Tennessee Williams book, Death of a Salesman, that is like the reality. We had a guy who was in his 60s and he had a stroke on the job because he was trying to work a high pressure sales job made for 20 and 30-year-olds at 60 because he had no savings and he had a greedy wife and children. So serious business, guys. That is the reality of life in sales. And lastly, number 8, because of all the shit that you're dealing with, sales will toughen you the fuck up, okay? I can define my life into 2 periods: life before sales and life after sales. Before I started in sales, I didn't even like calling the pizza man, right? I would get anxiety from doing that because I was raised to be so polite, and I'm naturally sensitive, and I'm fucking Canadian, which means that we're even more polite than the average person. So, harassing people on the phone. My whole life, I thought being in sales and being in phone sales would be my absolute nightmare. Like, I was an equities trader, and that was a completely different job. And I always thought sales would be the absolute worst job, and it would have been the last thing that I wanted to do in my life. Literally, I knew that from a very young age. And when I actually had to work in sales because I needed work, it was as bad as I thought, if not worse. But it toughened me the fuck up. Like, there was a point where I'm pitching CEOs in the washroom of a conference, CEOs of a multi-billion-dollar insurance company, or pitching. After I got out of sales, I was doing a startup, pitching venture capitalists. I was a fucking breeze. I could do that without flinching. I'm pitching CEOs at their Christmas party in the fucking boardroom, like really shameless stuff. So after being through that like meat grinder, hitting on some 20-year-old girl on the street is no fucking problem, right? Just completely different, tougher man. And that is by far the best thing that was the result of my years in sales.